first like to ask you about, what motivated you to get a band together and do shows in Japan.
Well, all along I'd intended to. I would have liked to go on making records. When I stopped when I stopped playing, when I sort of dropped out, kind of went on an extended sabbatical. It was because I'd just kind of come to the end of my endurance.
What did you have to endure?
Rock and roll life is very strenuous. Psychologically, physically, emotionally, and I'm a weak guy.
You like had a tour and stuff?
Yeah, being on the road all the time, living in hotels, having to deal with idiotic club owners and do interviews all the time, that kind of thing.
Sorry.
I always like to throw that in, just to like make people uncomfortable, you know what I mean?
Just on pins and needles here. That was about 82 then, right?
No, actually, no. The last time I played was in 85.
85?
Yeah. No, I didn't. Those the last 2 or 3 years were kind of erratic. But I always liked making records. I mean, that's the, I like making music and making records. And I regained my strength and revived and got this very seductive offer to come to Japan. I thought that would be the ideal way to sort of ideal kind of trial run, because it's comfortable and I like Japan and it's a sort of out of town tryout.
So it's kind of your this is your sounding board here. I mean, this is your way of getting back into it. The big question is, what were you doing during your sabbatical?
May I ask you something? That was out of curiosity. When you're interpreting, usually does the person to whom you're addressing questions usually look at you or the interviewer?
Yeah, that's right. That's funny you ask that, because most people will look at me, although some people will make a point of looking at the questioner, because that seems to be more polite. But, you feel free to look at it.
I'm just curious. What was I doing? Writing mostly. I edit a literary magazine in New York. I keep meaning to bring those down when I do interviews, because I brought some along to the show, but I always forget. And I'm working on a novel, and I have 2 books coming out this year. I've been writing a lot. That's mostly what I've done. I wrote a movie script that I want to direct this year. So yeah, that's how I've sort of recouped.
That's how you're making a living, though, editing and writing?
Writing, giving readings. I regularly give readings in the U.S. for my writing.
During the interim, you've kind of been molded into a punk hero of sorts over here. You've kind of been out of the limelight, but, since you're conspicuous in your absence, people have sort of built up this Richard Hell legend, the godfather of punk. He's asking, is this the same in America?
Well, among the aficionados, but It's hard for me to say because I haven't been out. You know, I mean, I'm really. Books keep appearing with my name in it, and it's not really very interesting, though. I mean, it's it's so. I don't believe in history. I think it's I think.
You sound like it's irrelevant, but no, I mean.
Well, it really it's sort of academic. Mm-hmm. I mean, I mean naturally I always one likes to. Make one's presence felt, but it's I don't really have much of a sense of it. I'm just sort of getting a sense of it by coming out again now. I mean, if it was the same thing as, say, I just don't know whether people are deriving from what I did, what I intended it the effect I intended it to have. I just, I don't know.
I think people are reading between the lines where they shouldn't be.
Well, it's. I'm not like a social leader. I think of the works that I produced as being sort of anti-leadership. They're more advocating the rejection of leaders. So I had kind of mixed feelings about being thought of as
head of the pack.
Yeah,
it's more like you try to do something very individualistic, and now you're being labeled as part of a big group.
Yeah, like it's like a leader of a movement. Or something, that's sort of the opposite of what I'm about.
Yeah, right. まあそのやろうとしてたことが5回 apparently when the tickets went on sale for your shows here, apparently they sold out in like a half an hour. Obviously, it's a rather telling fact there in terms of the influence you've wielded. I mean, you're not exactly an active performer in the sense that you haven't been releasing albums or touring or anything. So to sell out like that shows that obviously somebody somewhere is latching on to your message.
Well, that's pleasing.
Had you expected that?
Well, I've been getting feelers from Japan for a long time, and you figure when you haven't played in 5-6 years, there's bound to be some interest. Let's see if they still buy tickets the next trip. I don't know what to make of it. I just out there doing my best and seeing. None of it's very real. you know, I'd like to be able to have the means to go on producing work at the rate I'd like, you know. I mean, making records, and it's very expensive to make records, you know. It's very expensive to make movies, which is the other thing I'm interested in doing. So you need to be popular in order to continue working. You know, I mean, part of the reason I stopped making records was because at the scale that I was operating, I had to work way too hard to continue doing it. You know, I mean, I had to be out on the road, you know, month after month after month, and it wasn't worth it. So, but I don't know, what's the point we're getting at?
Well, just, you know, obviously, a lot of people are in tune with what you were doing, what you've done in the past. So, I mean, there's some sort of a force you've created, you know, and obviously, people who weren't around at the time to buy the records or listen to stuff are listening to it now. They're hearing it somehow and latching onto it. So I guess there's sort of a universal quality to it. That's why I guess you've been sort of built into this so-called punk hero. Although I don't think punk really does justice to the actual genre, the genre of music you do. But still, you've been kind of given that label. Yeah.
So what's my reaction?
Yes, what's the reaction? No, I think the original thing you want to know is the same thing happening elsewhere?
I don't know, see, because I've just said no for all these years. You know, when there's been any kind of feeler about if I'm interested in, you know, I mean, I get sort of, you know, tentative offers, you know, regularly. We'll see what happens, you know, now that I'm back out, you know. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, in America, I mean, I know there's less awareness of me in America than anywhere else. There's more in all of Europe and in Japan. America is it's a different story because it's so massive. So you know, I'm not really aware. I've been sort of, you know, just behind locked doors for these years. We'll see. People that's not that comfortable with being popular, you know. I mean, it tends to make me try to it tends to make me more offensive. If I'm too well liked, you know what I mean?
This is one of the reasons why, you know, you're kind of getting this exalted status here. Is that
I think this is really being exaggerated. I mean, I see these magazines, you know, and I can, you know, I might have a little, there might be a little classified ad in the back that mentions a bootleg or something, you know, but it's not as if, you know, I'm...
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to, you know, compete with Bruce Springsteen for, you know, a fantasy or anything. That's not
but even less than that, I mean, but anyway... Okay, we'll grant it for the time being.
Yeah, but he was saying that it owes to the fact that we've only had kind of bits and pieces of information on you. Mm-hmm. So we kind of like to set the record straight here. And go back and kind of trace the career there, just briefly. Kind of go over briefly. He was saying, first of all, '71 you like formed the Neon Boys with Tom?
Well, that was more like 73.
73.
Yeah.
But that was your first like real band, viable.
But even that was more of a phantom. I mean, we never appeared live.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that came from the only tape we ever made on a little 4-track machine in somebody's basement in Brooklyn. Because we weren't able to find the second guitar player that we wanted to complete the band, we were disbanding, and we wanted to record just for the record, so to speak, the material that we'd written, which amounted to 6 or 7 songs. So we went into this studio that we found advertised in the back of a newspaper, looking for the cheapest place we could find, just to have a record of the work we had done to, we went in there and taped, I think, 6 songs, and that's the entire output of the Neon Boys.
The basement tape. Meet up with Tom.
We were in high school together.
Was that right? Who was doing the club circuit in New York back then when you guys were in high school? What kind of acts were you aspiring to?
Well, we came to New York from high school. We weren't in high school in New York, but you mean when the Neon Boys existed? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, obviously when you guys got together and were like, we're playing music together, there were certain bands I'm sure you tried to look up to or emulate maybe.
Well, the only interesting bands around at that time that played in New York were the New York Dolls, the Modern Lovers, who were from Boston. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very dull period. It's sort of what we were reacting against. It was the music there in the early '70s was kind of stadium rock. This really inflated, Emerson, Lake and Palmer type of thing.
Bombastic stuff.
Yeah. Really pretentious and just pompous, meaningless, decadent. So yeah, the Dolls and the Modern Lovers were the only bands of any interest when in that period in the early '70s. In the clubs, nothing else happening. Everybody else was like just obvious imitative junk.
So the Neon Boys evolved into television?
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about?
Well, we were restless, because the Neon Boys seemed really promising, but we spent a year trying to find the guitar player, and when we broke up, it was really frustrating because we had all these ideas and ambitions, but we just weren't able to find the fourth member of the band. And so Tom and I were working in the same bookstore. And there was another guy working there who said he'd met a guitar player who might work out. And we auditioned the guy, and he seemed competent and, especially important, submissive.
That's what he's told.
And that was Richard Lloyd, and so we were able to start a band. Why did I eventually
leave television?
Well, we got a lot of attention really quickly, and egos came into play. Everybody thought they were the reason that we got the attention.
It's a pretty common story.
Right.
Yeah. So you just decided, well, I'll walk my own.
Yeah.
We all know that you were the reason for that.
Television was the best band in the world. But Tom thought that because I was not really competent bass player, I was, and that was no secret. I mean, I just was very rudimentary bass player, but that for me was part of the beauty of it. I mean, part of the whole.
That's what sets you apart from the other bands. There. You got a lousy bass.
Right. The message was anybody can do it. I mean, for me, that was a really important part of the message. I would place a different interpretation on his criticism of my bass playing. But anyway, and also just my sort of style on stage. He really wanted to kind of suppress me, He didn't want me moving. It just became very tense. So I broke off. We both sang. I sang my songs, he sang his songs.
After that you joined up with Johnny Thunder. How did that come about?
Well, Johnny always had an eye for talent.
Are you being humble? So he picked you out of the crowd?
Well, we immediately became like dolls. We sort of rendered the dolls history. We sort of up until we came along, the dolls were the band to see in New York, and we were very different from them. We rejected the kind of glam rock thing, and he used to come around to CBGBs all the time. And as the dolls kind of collapsed, the kind of style we represented was clearly the coming thing, So it just happened to work out. The timing just happened to be perfect. He called me one week after I left television, saying, "I've just left the dolls. Let's make a band together." So that's how it happened.
Never having really talk to them, it's kind of hard to for us to judge what these guys are really like. You're saying like Tom Brolin and Johnny Thunder seem to be sort of the diametric opposites of one another, whereas Tom seems rather nervous and or Johnny's more of a flamboyant type person.
Okay, astute.
Astute.
No, I mean this.
Astute observation.
Right.
Yeah. That's pretty much your opinion as well. Yeah. 非常に鋭い指摘だ。この人がいられなくなった。She also ended up quitting the Heartbreakers as well. You see, they were both very good bands, and why would you leave the Heartbreakers also?
It worked out that in the Heartbreakers, I kind of had the reverse role as I had in television, where, I was Tom to Johnny's me, that's what I mean, right?
Oh,
like,
I see. You were trying to be Johnny?
No, I wasn't. No. I didn't mean not that I was trying to keep him under control, but that I wanted to do more what I thought of as more subtle things than Johnny did.
He wanted to kind of rock and roll.
Pardon me?
He wanted to rock.
Yeah. It's a very but it was friendly though. That was the difference. I mean, there wasn't any hostility. It was the breakup was just a matter of. I respected him and appreciated what he did, but I just wanted to try a little, more experimental kind of. I was just sort of, I guess, more intellectual than him, which isn't which I don't think is necessarily good, but I mean, it's not like not like I'm making a judgment against him. It's just we just diverged a little bit that way, I wanted to have a band that really just followed my kind of vision, and Johnny just wanted to play classic old-fashioned rock and roll.
Maybe Chuck Berry.
Yeah. Or Keith Richards.
Yeah. Take your pick. Not that time that you got together the Voidoid. He was saying that was the word punk coming into use at that time?
I used the word. I mean, we all used the punk when in the early '70s, before punk was applied to the bands that we think of now as being punk.
The Pistols and the Jam and the Clash and all that.
Yeah. Was used, among my circle, and to my knowledge and my experience, was applied to the garage bands of the late '60s, like the Seeds, the West Coast stuff.
Interesting you said it, because I would have thought like the Ramones. That was always punk to me.
Yeah, but do you know, for instance, that album that Lenny Kaye put together called Nuggets?
No. Lenny Kaye. Well, I know Lenny Kaye.
Before he was guitarist for Patty, he was a rock writer and he compiled these anthologies, and that there was this whole in the late '60s in America. There was this whole it's like Paul Revere and the Raiders, the kind of music like the Seeds.
Like the Kingsmen.
Yeah, the Kingsmen. Right, yeah. All that kind of sounds. Yeah. was punk. Right. But then Punk magazine started in New York. In '75, I think it first came out. That covered all the CBGB's bands, and that's where the term came to be applied to that genre.
I didn't know that. It was a punk magazine. Did it last
Fairly long. And it was a great little magazine. It was a fanzine. It was had a lot of cartoons. The people in for instance, there was in '76 there was a Fumetti. You know what a Fumetti is? It's like a comic book but with photos. You haven't seen these? They don't have them in Japan? I would think they would. Yeah, it's instead of having drawn panels, they're photos with word balloons coming out of the mouth. Fumetti is Italian. I think that's where it originated. And in '76 there was a Fumetti called The Legend of Nick Detroit. That was an issue of Punk magazine. I was Nick Detroit. And Debbie Harry was the Talking Heads and Debbie Harry and were the Ramones in it? The Ramones showing up in it? I don't know. David Johansen was in it. This is an example of an issue. Kind of, it was a wild little magazine that combined sort of cartoon culture and rock and roll, called Punk Magazine, and it was well known in New York at the time. And Malcolm sort of imported it to London too, and that's where the word punk came to be applied to that. Yeah.
So obviously there was no real awareness of your guys, being part of a punk movement. But had you thought you were starting something? You were like the beginning of some sort of a movement or a rolling effect?
Yeah, well, I think it was intended. I mean, we aim to suggest an alternative, and sort of consciously constructed this whole comprehensive style, from a way of playing to a way of acting to a way of dressing, that yeah, it was deliberate.
Little anecdotes that sort of contributed to your so-called legendary status is you're using orange juice to spike your hair.
Beer.
Okay. Beer. Do you think you're the first one to do that?
With the hair?
Yeah, spike your hair.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So there won't much. Although, of course, many of given sort of Malcolm McLaren credit for kicking the whole thing off, but I guess he borrowed rather liberally from what was going on in New York.
Yeah. No, he acknowledges it.
Yeah.
Lately, he didn't then.
So doesn't that make you the godfather of punk then?
I yield to Iggy.
Did you have any ties directly with London at all?
Pardon me?
Did you have any direct ties with London or what was happening in London?
Well, how do you mean?
Did you actually perform, or did you have friends there among the musicians who were developing punk style at that time?
No, except for Malcolm. I mean, Malcolm.
Had you known him then?
Yeah. He hung out at CBGB's. He managed the dolls for the last year. Yeah, that's when we began. Yeah.
That's okay. So must have been about 75?
74, 75.
Yeah, when he was doing all
It was 1974.
He was doing had him dressed up in the Mao?
Yeah, all in red leather and a big communist flag. Yeah.
Okay.
And then he, when he was on that jaunt, he hung out at CBGB's, and he asked me to come to London to start a band, and when I refused, he wanted me to be the lead singer for the Clash. Right, when he went back to London, he wrote me a letter saying, I have a great idea, I met these kids, and I refused. Because he was like it's a really odd, he wanted to have rule with this, fascistic iron hand, which is, seeing what happened with the Sex Pistols, is pretty ironic, I mean, they were definitely out of control. But I didn't want to den mother, but yeah, no, that's all established. I mean, that was the sequence of events.
Blank Generation was sort of was seen as an anthem of sorts, I guess. Sort of symbolized the times. What did you have in mind when you wrote it, though? Did you have something completely in mind?
Ambiguity, if I had in mind. I'm drawing a blank.
I mean, were you trying to define what was going on, though? With you did say there was consciously a movement in mind. You guys were sort of trying to create something new. But it had Blank Generation had nothing to do with that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not asking you to pop a lot of people's bubbles. I mean, just wondering what you had in mind when you wrote the song.
I was saying, let me out of here before I was even born.
So
that's what I was saying.
Youthful angst, as they say.
As they say. I just wanted a pink Cadillac and a lot of girlfriends.
Rebel without a clue. So we really shouldn't be reading that much into it. You seem to
have your way with it.
Yeah. Take it with a grain of salt.
I think it's more significant than the Declaration of Independence.
That's interesting. Hey, that makes great copy. we now have our title for the interview. Nah, come on.
What?
But I mean,
if I could tell you what it meant when I wrote it, I wouldn't have to write it, would I? I mean, the point of writing it was to say what I meant, and I put a lot of work into it.
It's pretty self-explanatory. Are you still doing it now? I mean, are you going to be doing it?
Yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah, you'll do it now. It was not too long after that Blondie, the Talking Heads sort of went big time. Seems like you kind of just sort of, at least as far as he's concerned, you know, being here in Japan, you sort of faded from sight. Were you doing these mainly small venues? There was an album in '82. Or did not do that? The Disney Street in '82. Other than that, I mean, you seem to sort of faded from our view over here. What was going on?
I just guess I wasn't as ambitious as they were.
You just didn't want to do it.
Like I said, I'm a guy who kind of resists being too popular.
Yeah. Well, you know, even if you hadn't wanted to go big time, we would have expected at least a couple more albums, though. There weren't very many records.
Well, if I could have done them entirely on my terms, I would have gone on making records. I mean, I would have liked to make more records, but I'm just a neurotic, demanding, difficult guy. And I wasn't making enough money for any record company for them to, you know, accept that.
Yeah. The question about what kind of music you're doing now. I guess you did some work with the Neville Brothers in '84.
Not really the Neville Brothers. I played with the drummer in the Meters.
Okay.
And when I was in New Orleans.
But I mean, how about the type of music you're doing now?
Well, we're doing a couple of new songs on the tour, and some radical rearrangements of some other that. You have to hear it. You can't like describe.
I guess the unasked question is: Are you just reviving old stuff, or are you actually trying to be a viable contemporary act?
Well, to come to Japan, we pretty much put together a retrospective. You know, I mean, it's the classic kind of tour set where it's 2 or 3 songs from each album, some obscure and unreleased stuff that isn't recent, some off-the-wall covers, and some brand new songs, you know. But I wouldn't come to Japan and play, you know, after never having played here, and only play things that nobody knew. You know? That's mostly what I've done. I wrote a movie script that I want to direct this year. So yeah, that's how I've sort of recouped.
That's how you're making a living, though, editing and writing?
Yeah, writing, giving readings. I regularly give readings in the U.S. for my writing.
During the interim, you've kind of been molded into a punk hero of sorts over here. You know, I mean, you've kind of been out of the limelight, but, you know, since you're conspicuous in your absence, people have sort of built up this Richard Hell legend. you know, the godfather of punk. He's asking, is this the same in America?
Well,
We first like to ask you about, you know, what motivated you to get a band together and do shows in Japan.
well, all along I'd intended to. I would have liked to go on making records. When I stopped when I stopped playing, when I sort of dropped out, kind of went on an extended sabbatical. It was because I'd just kind of come to the end of my endurance.
What did you have to endure?
Rock and roll life is very strenuous. And I regained my strength and revived and got this very seductive offer to come to Japan. I thought that would be the ideal way to sort of ideal kind of trial run, because it's comfortable and I like Japan and you know, it's a sort of out of town tryout.
So it's kind of your this is your sounding board here. I mean, this is your way of getting back into it.
Mm-hmm.
The big question is, what were you doing? You're doing yourself.
You know, psychologically, physically, you know, emotionally, and I'm a weak guy.
You like had a tour and stuff? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, being on the road all the time, living in hotels, having to deal with idiotic club owners and do interviews all the time, that kind of thing.
Sorry.
I always like to throw that in, just to like make people uncomfortable, you know what I mean?
That was about 82 then, right?
No, actually, no. The last time I played was in '85.
85?
No, I didn't. Those the last 2 or 3 years were kind of erratic. But I always liked making records. I mean, that's the, you know, I mean, I like making music and making records.
Radical.
May I ask you something? That was out of curiosity. When you're interpreting, usually, does the person to whom you're addressing questions usually look at you or the interviewer?
Yeah, that's right. That's funny you asked that, because most people will look at me, although some people will make a point of like looking at the questioner, because it seems to be more polite.
Yeah.
But you know, you feel free to look at it.
I'm just curious. What was I doing? Writing mostly. I edit a literary magazine in New York. I keep meaning to bring those down when I do interviews, because I brought some along to the show, but I always forget. And I'm working on a novel, and I have 2 books coming out this year. I've been writing a lot.